video, I'm going to be going back to the basics and showing you guys how to do a simple foil highlight. With ombre and balayage being so big right now, I think a lot of people forget how great a foil highlight can be. I'm just going to be showing you guys how I section and how I do it, so if you want to see, then just keep watching. So this is my beautiful model, Deborah, and I have not used her in 4 years since I went to cosmetology school, so I just quickly ran a flat iron through her hair. So I'm going to show you guys how to section first. So you're going to need a highlighting comb like this, and what I like to do is sort of go from the part, and a basic way to do this is doing a mohawk sectioning, but if she has a side part, you do have to take that into consideration. So what I like to do is go about 1.5 inches away from the part onto the opposite side and just draw a straight line right there. Then her part is right here, so you can see her part right there. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side, take about 1.5 inches on that side and just draw a straight line there, taking that all the way back as well. And you want to make sure when sectioning that you don't take a larger section than how wide your foil is, or else it won't work and the hair is going to be forcing itself into the foil and you're going to just have really sloppy work. And then in the back, what I like to do is just kind of square it off just to make everything nice and even. You go ahead and clip that out of the way, and I'll just show you guys real quick how the back looks. You can see that it's basically just a rectangle on the top of her head, and right where the roll starts is where I like to section that off there, just because you can start doing different sectioning at that point. Once I have the top done, what I like to do is come to the side, and like I said before, you have to make sure to be really careful on how wide your section is, because your foil has to be able to fit in that section. So what I like to do is take it around the ear level and draw a straight line down. And you can see there that that is a straight line, and it basically meets the very edge of the ear right there. And that's a good indication on most people that the foil will fit in this one section. And then you just want to do the same thing on the other side. And you can see right here that it does go farther on that top section as it does right there, but that's typically right on the top where I would stop the foil just to make sure that everything meets up from the sides to the top. And then I'm only going to be showing you guys a partial highlight. I'm not going to be going all the way down today. And then this way I would just take it from the tip of the ear and go straight across on both sides. So now that we have her sectioned, what you need is a bowl and a brush, and then developer and lightener of your choice. I'm just using Redken Flash Lift and then a 30 volume developer. And obviously you're going to also need some foil. Since we're only doing half of a head, I'm only going to be using 1 scoop of lightener, and you can mix according to how they recommend, but I just like to mix it to the consistency that I like, just because sometimes if it's too thick and becomes dry, it actually does stop working. It needs to stay wet in order for the lightener to continue working. So what I like to do is just mix it how I feel that I want it, and every situation will be different. So with the lightener that you are using, just make sure you read directions, and you can go ahead and follow their mixing ratios if you want, or just do what I do and get the consistency that you know is going to work best for you and your client. So I like to start in the back on the bottom section, just because if you start at the top and you have to keep pulling the foil forward and clipping it out of the way, it becomes a little bit messy. So I do like to start at the bottom in the back. The back of the hair tends to be more resistant, and if you have to rinse the back first, say it gets lighter and you need to rinse right away while the front is still processing, it's easier to rinse the back and still have the front processing, as opposed to trying to get the front rinsed while the back is still processing in the shampoo bowl, if that makes any sense. I am going to try my best to make sure that you guys can see what I'm doing. The first thing I like to do is start at the one side of the ear, and I typically would start at the left and work my way to the right, but I wanted to show you guys what I'm doing before I really get going. Like I said, you do have to make sure that your sectioning is going to be smaller than the foil, just because you have to fit the foil on there, and you don't want it to overlap on either side, just because that means that the edges will be pulling over and it's just going to be really messy foil work. So you always just want to make sure that you are keeping your section smaller than the width of the foil. Now, I'm not going to be doing anything too chunky, but I do want to see that she has highlights, so I'm going to be going in with a medium weave, and this is just a basic weave. So what you want to do is just foil out. What I like to do is just take a little section like that, and then I like to leave out basically the same size section, and then you go ahead and continue on, and that's just how I like to do it, just because it is the most basic way to foil highlight. You can see that the top part here is what we're going to be leaving in the foil, so then you go ahead and drop that bottom section. And I hope you guys can see this, but it basically looks like a zigzag when you are done. And you want to make sure that your section is not too thick, because if you were to take a full foil section like this, that's like a 1/2 inch, it's not going to be thoroughly saturated all the way through, so you want to keep that in mind also. So this is the section that I'm going to be working with, and what I like to do is take my foil and my comb, I like to put behind it and fold that over so that I have a lip on one side, and I'll be showing you guys why I like that in just a second. And at this part, you want to make sure that you are getting up nice and snug at that very top. I like the foil to be right at that line. And then I just like to hold it really tight with this hand down here and release my comb, and you can do it whatever way you want to. I'm just going to be picking up a little bit of product, and I like to start about a 1/2 inch down and just start painting that on. And then once I have that going, I like to just feather up toward the top, not going above that foil, because that will cause bleed lines, and that is something you definitely want to avoid. A bleed line, if you don't know, or a bleeder, is basically a spot in the hair that hit the scalp and processed against the scalp, and it's going to cause a circle and not be very pretty. So once I have got to the top, just go ahead and work through your ends, and sometimes you do have to go back in and get more of your lightener. And then I just like to work my way through. Sometimes I'll take and push through here just to make sure that the lightener is getting all the way through to the other side, and then go ahead and go over that until you know you are ready. And during this step, this part up here can become loose, so that's why I like to leave that lip. So at this point, I take it about 1/3 of the way from the bottom, so about 1/3 down, and I fold it up one time. Then I take my comb, and leaving a little bit of a lip there also, I fold that up another time, and then I lift this up, and you can see here that there's that lip. I like to fold that down, press that really hard against the head, and then you can go ahead and fold in your corners, and that's just going to ensure a tighter foil and make sure that everything stays nice and tight. So I'm going to show you guys one more time just so you can really see what I'm doing. You want to take a small section, again making sure that it is not too wide so that it fits nicely in the foil. And I'm doing a medium weave throughout this whole process, so just make sure that you are being consistent with your weaving. Sometimes you can vary, and that is fine, but make sure that it's going to be looking even when you're done. So I just took a medium weave out, and again, you just drop that bottom section. And before you start throwing lightener on it, you do want to make sure that you are looking at your section and making sure that you are happy with it. Once again, I take the foil in my hand, put my highlighting comb behind it, leaving about 1 inch to 2 inches of a lip, making a crisp line, putting that foil nice and tight against that scalp, and I like to sort of shimmy my comb out. Like I said, I drop my comb, and you don't have to do that, it's just easier for me. Going about 1 inch to a 1/2 inch below that line. Once you have done that, you can go ahead and go closer to the top of that foil, making sure not to go over that foil line. And then go ahead and finish the rest. Going from the bottom third and folding that up and making a line, taking my comb about halfway through that section and going up and folding that. You want to lift it, grab that lip, push against the head to make it a little bit tighter, and then go ahead and fold in your corners. So I am going to continue on and just sort of tell you guys tips and tricks along the way, but I'm not going to be showing you guys the full process just because I know that would take forever. So I'm just going to continue on and, like I said, give you tips throughout the whole process and try to cover as much as possible. When I'm on this side over here, you're really not going to be able to see what I'm doing. That's mainly why I'm not showing you guys the full process, just because I know you're not going to be able to see just with the camera angle that I have it at, the whole situation. And I'm not wanting her to be platinum. I'm basically just wanting to add some warm, lighter highlights throughout her hair. I would say that this mannequin is a level 5 naturally, and I don't really want to go any lighter than a level 8. So basically at that caramel or caramel stage or the honey stage, just because I don't like the look of somebody with darker brown hair and then having like platinum highlights, especially because I am showing you guys just a basic highlight, nothing too fancy. So at this step, what I like to do is just hold the section in my left hand and take my highlighting comb and going about a ½ inch up from that bottom section to bring down the hair. And this is going to depend on every client. This is just what I'm showing you what I would typically do. Then you go ahead and clip the rest of that out of the way. Another way you can do it that sometimes is easier for me, just depending on a client, what I like to do is just do what I've been showing you guys and weaving out what you're wanting to lighten. But at this point, I still like to fold the foil the exact same way, but I like to place sometimes the lightener a ½ inch to an inch down, like I said, just making sure that that's saturated, and then lifting the foil as opposed to getting too close to the scalp at this point, just because sometimes it is easier depending on the length of somebody's hair. And I'm finding that it's going to be really hard for me with this short of hair, so I'm just going to be doing it this way as opposed to the first way that I showed you guys. But like I said, it really depends on you and the client that you're working on, how fast you're going, and everything like that has to be taken into consideration. So if you see me switching it up throughout this process, that is why. When you're first starting to learn how to foil and highlight and everything, sometimes you're not very fast, but with practice it does get a lot easier to do these types of things. So if you're first starting out, don't necessarily worry about time as much, but starting in the back is going to really help that situation, like I said, because if you are finally getting to the front and the back is already processed, you can go ahead and rinse that out. Another thing you can do is spray it with water, and that will stop the processing also if you just take the foil and spray it with water. And that also works if there is a specific foil that is done for the others. But like I said, sometimes when you're first starting out, you're not going to be the fastest foilers, so don't worry about that necessarily. Get the technique down and then worry about time. You don't want to be taking 5 hours to just do a simple foil highlight, even though I know a lot of color corrections and everything. I've definitely spent that much time on a client, just depending on what they're wanting. But something that is simple like this should not take any more than 2 or 3 hours. And you just want to make sure that you are being consistent through this and making sure that you are just following the steps and not doing sloppy foil work. I think that's where a lot of people kind of, they stray away from foils because they've had bad experiences, or they're just finding that it doesn't look natural. And it really depends on the size of the foiling and how the person is doing it, what is being used, how light you were being taken, toner, and everything. So there is a lot that goes into this. My goal is to not have to tone this mannequin, just because that's more product being used on a mannequin that's not paying me. So I'm just doing a simple caramel color, like I was saying, nothing too crazy, but I did want to show you guys just basic highlighting. And you also want to make sure when you're doing your foils that if you had a foil that right here, like this one, you probably won't be able to see it, but there is a foil right at the edge. You want to make sure that you're skipping a section in between just so it doesn't create a really chunky foil highlight in a certain spot. So be conscious of that also. And I should mention, I did forget, that the reason I like to start about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch away from the scalp is just so there's not too much product toward the top, because if lightener swells, that's also going to cause those bleeders that you hear people talking about. And you just want to avoid that at all costs. And then you can always go back in with a little bit more product. And I still like to place it about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch below that. And you can go ahead and work that up as well if you are needing to use more product. You just don't want to completely saturate really close to the scalp, like I said, because if your lightener swells or anything, especially from the heat of somebody's head, you want to be careful and conscious of that. So just keep that in mind also. And as you can see, I've typically been doing one on this side, one on this side, and then one down the middle, so 3 sections. But once I get to the crown of the head, what I like to do instead of starting from the side section is go about a 1/2 inch from that middle and just taking that down and clipping the rest out of the way. I just find that when the roll of the head, especially in the crown area, comes into play, you do have to be really careful with how you are sectioning the hair, because you don't want too much blonde in the crown area or not enough. So that just sort of is an easier way for me to make sure that my sectioning is going to still be really nice and neat in the top crown area of my client's head. You can see there that that is pretty even with the other ones, or more so even, and that there is a straight line here. So once again, I'm just going to take a 1/2 inch section, and this is basically the last section for the back, and I'm going to add that into the sides or the very top. So here I'm going to be doing 2 foils just because I know it's too wide for just one of my foils. And you really do want to have good highlighting and foil work throughout the whole head, but on the areas where they're going to see it, you really need to make sure that you are doing good foil work and everything is nice and neat. You don't want the top to be like already looking like it's grown out or anything. You really want to make sure that you make it look as nice as possible. Like I said, you definitely want to make sure that all of your work is looking great, but be really conscious through the whole area around the part or the face where they're really going to see. So now that the back section is done, I do like to move on to the side sections. And obviously this is not the only way to section. You can actually go from the part, but a lot of clients that I have don't always have the exact same part, so I don't like to necessarily do that because I don't want it looking like they have more blonde on one side along the part or anything like that. So I like to just do the mohawk sectioning when I get to this area here. So this section is going to be really small, but what I like to do is just do the exact same thing I was doing on the back. And if you have somebody that's really blonde, like a really heavy blonde, I would actually take out about 1 inch sectioning right by the ear. But since we are just doing basic highlights on somebody, I'm just going to be doing simple sectioning. And with clients like this, where they mostly want to keep their natural and just add some highlights for definition, I don't like to do foil highlighting right next to the face, and I'll show you what I mean in just a second. So you're going to want to take your section just like you have been doing, and what I like to do is make sure that I'm leaving a small hair area right out by the face. Just like this area right here, I'm going to be leaving out by the face, just so if she pulls her hair back, there's not going to be a super stripy, harsh line in her hair. And that is mainly for clients that do mostly keep their natural. If somebody, like I said, is super highlighted blonde, that is where you really do want to focus. But in a situation like this, you want to be really careful not to go too close to the face, because sometimes that is not the best look, just depending on how often somebody comes in and what they are looking for. And then you just want to repeat the exact same thing on the other side. And this time I am starting closer to the face. So what I like to do is push a section out with my comb and then start weaving to make sure that the section by the face is going to be left out. And I do have to mix just a little bit more lightener, and since I do already have over half of the head gone, I'm going to be adding a little bit less than 1 scoop. I've learned my lesson in not over mixing. It's always easier to mix more, but if you over mix and just waste product, that is just money going out of your pocket. So that is another tip that I have, is try to get as close as you're thinking you need to, but if you're unsure of how much product you're going to need, it's always better to mix less than you're thinking, because you can always go back in and mix up more lightener or even just more color in general. And now it's time to work on that top mohawk sectioning. So what I like to do is basically just continue on with how I would the back section. Just want to make sure that you're taking the same sectioning. So I'm taking down about a 1/2 inch. And I'm at the very top of the head where it's still slightly rolled at the crown, but not very much. So you just want to make sure that you are continuing on with the same way you have been foiling. And the reason I really do like to do a mohawk sectioning is mainly for the part, but you can just get in better lines around the part and they don't look so harsh. It gives just a little bit more of a natural foil in my opinion, so that is why I like to do it, and that is actually how I did learn to do it in school. Everybody's hair is going to be different. I don't do it on every single client. It really does depend on what somebody's wanting. At this point, a lot of the times a client is going to try to lean back to make your job easier, but instead of having them crane their neck that whole time, what I do like to do is just start working from the front. So I am going to be turning the mannequin around just to demonstrate how I would do that. So you can see here that the mannequin does have a curve in the head, so you do have to be really careful because a lot of clients are going to have different hairlines as well. So what I like to do is just take a smaller section about a 1/2 inch away still, just like I would, but it's not going to be a 1/2 inch away from the one part, so you do want to be really careful there. And I would actually do this in 2 sections if that were the case with a client. So you can see here that it is more of a even parting. She's still like slightly curved right there, but not as much as this section here. So I would actually leave this section out where it's not quite a 1/2 inch, and then go ahead and foil the section where you know it's not going to be too many highlights too close to the face. Especially if a client does wear their hair back a lot, you just have to really take a lot into consideration with each client, because like I said before, all clients are going to be different, and the way you do clients' hair is going to be different, so that is another thing to keep in mind. Most clients are going to be okay with having hair in their face for just a few seconds, but once I have that section done, what I like to do is just make sure that the hair is out of the face, and if you have to kind of roll up the bottom part of the foil so they can see a little better, you can go ahead and do that, and that just makes it a little bit more comfortable for the client also. And like I said before also, I think how you foil throughout the whole hair is really important, but make sure that you are doing a really good job on the top, and don't rush just because you're getting toward being done with the foiling section. You want to really make sure that everything that is being shown the most is going to look the absolute best. So keep that in mind also, even though you might want to start to rush at this point, especially if you have been staring at the clock and it's been taking a while to foil. Just make sure you're not rushing through any of the sectioning, because like I said, you can always just rinse the back if you have to, or spray it with water. You just want to really make sure that you are doing a good job everywhere, but especially along the parting. And I'm at the last section here, and I have a foil on each side. So what I like to do is take this hair here, and sometimes it's easier to clip it just because the part can be a little bit difficult. And I like to take the hair in the back and put that down just to make sure that there is hair also down in the back, and then go ahead and continue with your last foil. You just want to make sure that you don't have 2 foils too close together in one area. You want to be consistent throughout the whole head. Now that I am on my very last section, my lightener that I am using says not to use heat. I have actually done it in a few circumstances, but you do always want to make sure that you try to follow the rules as best as possible. Now this is a mannequin, so she does not have heat coming off of her head, so I may have to add heat at the very last section, but I'm going to try not to, just because what really activates the action of the processing for lightener is the heat of a client's head. And obviously, like I said, this is a mannequin. She does not have heat radiating off of her hair. But I'm going to try not to use heat just because that is what the manufacturer's directions are. And once you have done foiling, what I like to do at this point is check one of the first foils that I have done. So I just like to lift up the hair here, making sure that there's no hair in the way. And then I just like to unfold one of these bottom foils to see how it is coming along. And you can see here that it's at that orange stage. It's probably about a level 7 or 8. And I would more than likely have to tone this client if it was an actual client of mine. But I'm more than likely only going to be using purple shampoo just because it is just a mannequin. And she's not paying me. So once you have seen where your back sectioning is, I like to also look at the side sectioning. So you can see here that it is a little bit darker than that back section. I hope you can see it's not being too overexposed by that window. But it is probably a level darker than the back. And then you just want to make sure that you are checking both sides. And this side is about the same as the other front side. So I'm just going to keep watching it and letting everything process. Since you just got done with the front section, or like the very last section, you already know that this is not going to be done. You can go ahead and check it if you want, just to make sure it's going okay, but you more than likely will not have to. So what I like to do is every 5 or 10 minutes check a different foil. I don't like to mainly check the same foil, just because if you are going for the same foil, you're basically just loosening it up even more every time. So I like to check different foils. So I'm going to keep checking every 5 or 10 minutes, and I will let you know how long this takes to process. And here are the finished results. You can see that it just added some dimension throughout her hair, and it is even all the way through. And I did not use purple shampoo or toner or anything. This is just what it came out to be. And it does not look brassy, so I just kind of left it so you guys could just see what it was in the natural state. Kind of show you guys the part line. You can see that the highlights did get nice and close to the root there in that parting, and it just gives a really natural look. So you can see under here the natural color that we started out with. Like I said, it was basically just a level 5 all overs, so basically a light to medium brown. And then adding those highlights just gave it more dimension and lightness all over. And I did mention that I don't like to put the foil highlights right against the face, so I'm just pulling the hair back here so you can see that if she were to wear her hair in a ponytail, you could still see the dimension throughout, but it is not right against the hairline, as you can tell. So you can see that there are still highlights running throughout the hair, but there would be no harsh cutoff lines or anything, especially during grow out. And I just think that makes it look a lot more natural. So that was just a super simple way in how to highlight hair. Obviously everybody's going to be different, and this is just on a mannequin, but I hope it was helpful. I hope you guys learned something from this video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, go ahead and leave those down below, and I'm always happy to help you guys out. If you haven't subscribed and want to see more videos from me, don't forget to do that. If you guys have any requests you want to see, also leave those down below, and I'll be happy to do those also. I hope you guys have an awesome day, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye everybody!